I will let Jonas do his own introduction. He's more than capable of doing so. Jonas is someone who focuses mostly on the red teaming, although he is getting more and more purple, so we are converting him, so we just have to keep at it. But he's been working very heavily on thinking about how we can involve blue team activity as well. Yeah, Jonas, I think that's it for me. I'm just going to let you immediately jump on it and give your own nice introduction and walk us through your Attack of the Emulators, which, yeah, it's the first Star Wars themed title of the day, which is a bit surprising that we made it till after the lunch break, but there you go. You never know, right?
Thanks, Eric. I actually did not include an introduction slide, assuming you would give a perfect introduction for me, since we've been colleagues for a couple of years now, but I guess I'll just do it myself then. So I work at NVISO since a few years already. And my main focus is red teaming and purple team exercises. So I'm also the red team lead at NVISO, where I think out the assessment approach and the general solution strategy. So with that said, what is this talk about? For this talk, I've based myself on the ethical hacking maturity model, which I've been talking with George about as well. And he mentioned maybe we should switch the name to Offensive Security Maturity Model, since the ethical hacking name is a bit outdated. So that's what I did in this slide already. So for this talk, my idea is to give you a presentation or an idea on getting from the leftmost side of the maturity model, vulnerability scanning, to the rightmost side. With a main focus on the right part. So mostly looking at red-purple teaming, adversary emulation, although with an idea on getting from the left to the right side as well. So you might be thinking, great, this is another discussion on testing terminology. Haven't we had enough of those on Twitter already? Partly that might be correct, but I think you need a bit of supporting theory on what these different types of tests are, to make sure that you know which one is most appropriate for your company or your clients in case you offer testing services. So I think a bit of terminology is needed anyway. But besides that, I also want to give you a bit of practical implementation, how we implement these different testing concepts and make them work together. And then finally, and I've already seen one General Kenobi reply on Slack, so I think the amount of memes I have added in here will definitely be appreciated. So going back to the offensive security maturity model, there is, in my opinion, a bit of a gap between the left and right side. So left, in short, you have vulnerability scanning. That's looking for vulnerabilities, trying to identify them. Then going on to assessment is weeding out the false positives, verifying if the vulnerability is actually there. So not blindly believing what your automated tool is telling you. And then you have penetration testing, where you actually try to exploit the vulnerabilities. But then there is a pretty big jump towards red teaming, which has a bit of a different goal compared to the more traditional pen testing. And then, of course, moving on to purple teaming and adversary emulation, that's going even further. So there is quite a gap between these different types of tests, which I would like to get into here. Now, in terms of details for pen testing and red teaming, so the differences between these types of tests, I've given a previous talk on that, and if you're interested, you could have a look there to see what I had to say on that. Now going back to the talk of today, so often I've heard that that red teaming is the new pen testing, that all companies are jumping on red teaming, that it's going to replace pen testing. But I think that's not the case, and many companies think when we've done a few pen tests, we should be ready to do red teaming, which is not the case either, because these tests on the left, they're often executed in an ad hoc manner. So you might identify issues and vulnerabilities, but do the test again on a different set of systems or applications, and the issue is still there. So often there is a lack of processes around these technical issues. For example, no patching and vulnerability management. The traditional pen testing does not validate employee awareness as well. So that's also not executed, not done, and not ready for red teaming. Oftentimes there is no SOC, no blue team doing monitoring. Domain admins are logged everywhere. And at that point, you are not ready yet to do red teaming, while you might be able to successfully get through pen testing without hugely red reports. So there are a number of things that you should have done before being able to get real or the most value from a red team exercise. So to give some examples, you don't need a red team exercise to identify one of those eternal blues still lying around and use that to advance their kill chain. If you don't have a blue team, then it doesn't really make sense to have a red team exercise performed, because without the blue team, without someone hunting for the red team has free play, basically. And if you don't know what your crown jewels are, what you're trying to defend, then the red team doesn't really know what they want to go after or have to go after in your network. So often one of the objectives that's set then is domain administrator. And while as a red teamer, it is nice to get domain admin, domain admin is not the final objective. So that's not one of the business objectives that you want to go after. So in the maturity model, I've added two different types of testing to bridge the gap between the left side and the right side, which, in my opinion, could help to prepare you for red team exercises. And that's objective-based penetration testing, followed by scenario-based penetration testing. How we implemented these at NVISO is the way it's presented here. So with an objective-based penetration test, what we're trying to show is to a client whether or not they could get breached via an exposed system. And in case that happens, how screwed are they if we would have been a ransomware? So often these the techniques that we use here are quite noisy. They're just going straight for the objective, which could be domain admin in this case. So this type of test is really a first test after just the traditional penetration testing to move on towards the objective-based testing, as the name implies. So it's both an external and internal test focused on technical issues, while we try to get access towards a number of flags or objectives. In this case, for this first test, this could very well be just domain admin, because we're preparing for the red team exercises. In terms of goals, the goal here is mostly focused on technical prevention measures, because we're only looking at technical aspects, technical issues, and we're trying to determine the business impact of an attack, or how far an attacker could get in the network. So for example, could they get domain admin? And once they have domain admin, could they get to other objectives perhaps? In terms of stealth, we don't really consider this to be a stealthy exercise. So we just want to get there as fast as possible, even if that means running a vulnerability scan to find an eternal blue to exploit. If it helps advance the kill chain, then that's fine for us in this type of exercise. So the outcome here should be that the target, that our client in this case, gets to fix the low-hanging fruit in terms of technical issues. So things that easily or quickly help us advance our kill chain, and to give them idea of their technical security baseline and help them improve those technical processes already. And if before the test they had no idea yet of their crown jewels, if they just had domain admin as an objective, this should get them thinking as to what their crown jewels are, as to what we, after getting domain admin, would be going after if we were attacking them. Then one step further, we have the scenario-based testing, which is basically an objective-based penetration test with some additional scenarios, as the name implies. So here, instead of just using external systems, we expand that to a number of different initial foothold scenarios, which could be phishing, for example, which could be a physical breach in combination with a rogue device plant, which could also be a wireless attack, wireless breach, a stolen laptop test. So there we try to find other ways to get into the network. And then same as before, we're again doing an internal test as well, where we try to access the objectives that have been defined. So that's similar to the objective-based pen test. So in terms of maturity, this is more focused at companies that have a bit of a technical baseline already, for example, that have gone through an objective-based test already, but then want to extend it to, instead of just testing the technical aspects, also testing their people and processes in more depth. I always say that this is like a red team without being stealthy. So here, you also make use of noisier techniques, similar to the objective-based pen test, but with the addition of additional scenarios, it comes a bit closer to a red team exercise. And here you're also looking mostly at assessing the resilience, so no detection yet, just assessing resilience in terms of people, processes, and technology. In terms of stealth, we don't really employ stealth here to evade the blue team, but there is still a partial stealth, as we mentioned here, partial stealth used to bypass people and processes, or to abuse them, so to say, in social engineering or physical breaches, because you want to make use of the people for phishing or for a physical breach, for example. So you don't want to tell them, hey, this is a pen test, can you just let us in? You still at least want to validate those aspects. So the outcome here is to further look at your defenses, your security posture, and look at the focus for the roadmap. So you will see, if we easily got in through phishing, then security awareness is definitely an improvement area. If we easily got in through physical with a rogue device, then that is a clear aspect for improvement. So this should help to determine where you should focus your improvement efforts. And then after having executed these types of tests, you should hopefully have a baseline in terms of people, processes, and technology. So people could be security awareness, both to phishing and physical awareness. In terms of processes, you should already have a bit of incident response processes. Your SOC should have processes in place to deal with security alerts or incidents before moving on to red teaming. People should have a process to report phishing, for example. And then for technology, an example there is patch management, vulnerability management. So this in terms of baseline or security baseline. And then you should also want to know what you want to validate. And some examples here are whether an attacker could be able to get in and stay inside your network, so persist in the network, if they're able to propagate and access critical systems and then exfiltrate the data that they have obtained. You could want to validate all of these aspects. You could want to validate a subset of those to focus on specific areas. So that's things that you ideally know before you get into the red team exercise. And then finally, you should know what you want to protect in terms of crown jewels. So the actual business objectives, so not just the domain administrator, but the actual systems that underpin your business processes, and that would hurt if an attacker get access to those systems or those or that data. So once you have this in place, then it is time to move on to the more advanced types of testing, mapped to the offensive security model again. So we first had red teaming followed by purple teaming, which are both examples of adversary simulation. And then as the final step, there was the adversary emulation, which can be applied to both types of exercises actually. So first, looking at the red team. So the goal of the red team is basically to check If we are targeted by a threat actor, could we be able to detect and remediate this type of attack? If an attacker targets us, what could they accomplish in our network before we are able to detect it and to respond to it? So this type of exercise is aimed at more mature companies that definitely have a blue team in place or a SOC, who then want to assess whether or not the SOC can detect or prevent this type of attack, with prevention more aimed at the engineers and the other teams. So in terms of execution, this is a realistic attack simulation based on TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures along a kill chain. In terms of goal, this is validating the entire spectrum, all of the aspects of the company. So people, processes, and technology. And in this case, in terms of prevention, detection, and response, while these the previous types of testing, objective-based, scenario-based, was mostly focused on prevention. So in this case, in terms of stealth, you do want to be stealthy. You do want to stay under the radar, avoid the blue team detecting you, and try to get access to those objectives. And then in terms of outcome, you want to determine what kind of impact a realistic attack could have, and also determine improvement areas based on that result. Now, a statement similar to one of the earlier slides. Purple teaming is the new red teaming. With purple teaming gaining more traction, companies want to move to that as quickly as possible. But similar to red teaming, there are a number of prerequisites that you should have in place for purple teaming as well. And I think many of those have been explained or presented in previous presentations as well. So in this case, you definitely want that baseline security, a baseline processes in place, which you should have obtained through the previous exercises or through previous types of exercises in the maturity model. And then you also want a logging capability, of course, a central logging platform where all of the logs are being collected, being aggregated, where you can parse them, where you can search for specific events, where you can create alerts. Then in that logging platform, you want to gather logs from endpoints, so servers and workstations, and network devices, which could be DNS, proxy, IDS, firewalls. So all of these logs should be ingested in that central logging platform, which you can then use for visibility and hunting. And then finally, and also quite important, is to have people working the SOC. So you're not going to be of much use with all of your logging capabilities without having the proper people manning the SOC and doing the actual threat hunting, following up on alerts. So that's not something to overlook. And if you have all of this in place, then you can start with purple teaming, where the purple team is more aimed at can we detect a specific set of techniques? If there is no detection, then do you at least have the logs available to detect those techniques? So this is less aimed at incident response, but more at detection, and then in particular improving your detection capabilities. So for execution, you will select a number of techniques to test. You could base this on different scenarios as well, or along a kill chain. You could test a number of initial foothold techniques, a number of network propagation techniques, and a number of techniques aimed at accessing your crown jewels. So that's definitely possible. But the goal is to improve detection against those techniques. Now, in this case, stealth is again not important or not the case, because you're cooperating with the blue team. And in terms of outcome, there is the goal of improving your logging and detection of the use cases of the techniques that you have selected. Now, for selecting the relevant techniques, We have listed a number of ways or a number of aspects that we often use to select relevant techniques. And here we're still looking at the adversary simulation part. In terms of adversary simulation versus emulation, that's also a debate that has been going on for a while, and is also part of the previous talk that I presented. So if you're interested there, again, there are slides of a previous Sun Summit that you could have a look at and see whether or not you agree with my view on that. In any case, selecting relevant techniques for the simulation part, one very good way to do that is in terms of overall popularity. So just looking at the techniques that have been most widely abused, have been most observed in incident response, which is, of course, a good indicator of how important that technique would be. A very good source on that is the Red Canary threat report. There is a 2021 version, which is a couple weeks old, if I remember correctly. So they have based this on 20K confirmed threats. Well, first of all, 400 billion pieces of telemetry a day, which has then been reduced to one threat detection report, and which is a very nice resource if you want to have a look at the top 10 most popular techniques with quite some detail on how they work operationally. So this is definitely good to start. And then next to overall popularity, there is the historically important techniques and the threat landscape as well. Historically important, those are techniques that could have been abused in previous exercises. To give you an example there, if you have done a red team exercise where you saw that the red team used techniques ABC and you weren't able to detect them then, or they could use them to advance their kill chain, then it can be interesting to include those techniques in your purple team exercise. Similar to that, techniques that have been abused in incidents in your company, those could be interesting to include to make sure that you can detect them in the future if you haven't in the previous incident. And then finally, the threat landscape. If there is a new vulnerability being published, a new proof of concept that is abused in the wild, that's gaining a lot of traction, then it could be interesting to see if you can have detection for that specific issue to avoid it being abused in your company or being abused without you knowing, at least. And then as the final step in the maturity model, there is the adversary emulation concept. So this can be applied to both red and purple teaming. So in the case of red teaming, the idea there would be if you can detect and remediate a targeted attack by a specific adversary, which is where the emulation part lies. So a specific adversary. On the purple side, that's more aimed at the detection of those techniques. So not really at remediation, but can we detect these techniques used by a specific adversary? And if not, are the logs available at least? So selecting relevant techniques here boils down to selecting relevant adversaries and then testing their techniques. So here you need to know what kind of techniques the adversary is using. Or would be likely to use. And for starters, know what kind of adversary would target you. So for this, threat intelligence is needed as input. If you have the luxury of having specific threat intel for you as a company, then that's perfect. If not, you can use region or sector specific threat intel. But in any case, it is likely to be incomplete. Since adversaries as well, they evolve, they move on, and they could start using new techniques that are not part of previous threat reports. So this was the theoretical aspect. So now we have a view on a practical implementation, albeit high level, of how we implement these concepts and these types of testing. So for purple teaming, the goal is to move to a continuous form with the objective of improving defenses. So that's continuously, so year after year. Then in terms of red teaming, what we do there is periodic assessments with the goal of assessing the security posture. And I've been chatting with a client last week, and they have put this perfectly. So they said, well, we see purple teaming as the course and red teaming as the exam, which I think phrases it very nicely and better than what I could think of. So with these periodic red teaming assessments, what is important in our opinion is to have a replay slot or replay workshop in the end, where the red team is able or willing to discuss everything that they have performed with the blue team. So where they present a timeline of all of the techniques that they executed, with the details of where the technique was coming from, so the source, the destination. So everything that allows the blue team to start hunting for those techniques and to see if they have the necessary logs available for that. Because while the goal is assessing whether or not you can detect it, if the blue team does not have any benefit from the exercise, and next year the red team just comes back, performs the same techniques, and destroys the blue team again, so to say, then the blue team doesn't really get much benefit from it. So I think it is important at the end of the red team exercise that you have red and blue sitting together and going through the kill chains and everything that was executed. A more practical example of how we implement this continuous purple teaming. So we, from the point of view of a consulting company, how we have implemented this at clients. So purely continuous is very hard to accomplish, would require a lot of time investment from both parties, so both from us and the client. And often they cannot assign this amount of time to their SOC or blue team for continuous purple teaming. At least not if you want to try different techniques every time continuously. So we have come up with this type of approach that combines ad hoc testing or individual exercises, at least, with a continuous aspect as well. And what we do is every quarter execute a number of campaigns manually, and then pour these into some types of replay packages, which can then be executed by the blue team in between those quarterly executions. So in practice, what this could look like is that for the first quarter, we select 2 campaigns aimed at adversary simulation. For example, we take TTPs used by a previous red team or used during a previous exercise, and then TTPs for which the SOC thinks that they should have detection in place. We execute these. We report the results. We pour these into replay packages, deliver that to the blue team, and they can execute these packages at will in between quarters and keep fine-tuning their detections. Then in the next quarter, we come back. We leverage those replay packages as well to execute the Q1 campaigns again and report on improvements. And then we implement new campaigns. For example, the top 10 TTPs used, which could be based on the Red Canary threat report, or a brand new CVE for which a proof of concept has been published. And then same story, we put those into replay packages again. We have the blue team execute those replay packages in a continuous fashion based on the time they have available at their tempo. In between these quarterly executions. And then when we go back, we can use the replay packages again to execute previous campaigns, report on improvement, and then repeat with a new campaign again. So last 2 examples of these campaigns could be TTPs, so techniques aimed at getting to their crown jewels. So specifically lateral movement to crown jewels, for example. So you know whether or not detection is available for their most important assets. And then finally, which was also the final layer or the final bar in the offensive security maturity model, the adversary emulation part. For campaign 6, we could choose a specific threat group and emulate their techniques. For these replay packages, what we use is Site, which you've seen in, or at least the company you saw in the previous presentation as well. So Site allows to create campaigns and put a number of techniques in there that you want to have executed automatically, and then return these in .exe or DLL format, which is exactly what we need to facilitate the approach we explained on the previous slide. So this allows the blue team to replay those campaigns and fine-tune their detection rules whenever fits on their side. And then when we come back, we can report on improvements with these same replay packages. So some other examples of tools include Prelude, Caldera, Atomic Red Team, whatever floats your boat. For reporting, and I've seen both of these tools mentioned before as well, we use Vector because that integrates with Site, so we can ingest the campaigns that we executed to easily see the results. So in terms of reporting, you want to see what kind of techniques were prevented or blocked, or lacking defenses, so which could be successfully executed by an attacker. And you also want to see where you are in terms of logs to enable detecting those techniques. So the goal there is to highlight weak and strong points, which can be mapped to the kill chain, to specific tactics, and importantly, to report to management as well, show evolution over time, and show how you improve, how your detection improves against these techniques. Now, during these purple teams, we've also observed a number of things and ran into some pitfalls ourselves. So in hindsight, there have been a number of red or purple team exercises where we would have been better off, or the client would have been better off with a objective or scenario-based test. So where we did purple teaming, but we saw that many of those basic processes were not in place yet. Secondly, purple teaming is also quite difficult with certain SIEMs or UEBA, so user and entity-based anomaly or analytics, because these types of tools, they create a baseline of users and machines, and then report on things that are not in line with that baseline. But if you have a test user and you have that user executing all of those techniques, then your malicious behavior will become the baseline. So that makes it hard to write specific rules there. The purple teams also require a considerable blue team investment. So you need to have someone dedicated to assist us, to help us with the exercise, who has time to jump in a call with us, so we can test those techniques together, because we have tried with daily sync slots of 1 hour in the evening, but it doesn't work. You don't get anywhere. So for efficiency reasons, it is better if you jump together and test those techniques together. And then finally, when you think you have working detection cases, some unexpected things will happen to prove you wrong. Specific examples there have been detection cases that were not rolled out in production yet. Some others where specific rules were based on firewall zones, for example, and while they should have triggered on the internal zone, due to an incorrect mapping, these were not triggering. So when switching the use case to not external, they suddenly started triggering. So unexpected things will happen to your use cases that avoid the detection that you were hoping for or assuming would happen. And then as a final slide, I would like to mention that you should make sure to offer or request the type of exercise aligned with your maturity, to make sure that you can optimize the value you provide in that exercise, that you make sure that you and the client know what you will test exactly, that you have the correct expectations set, no matter what you want to call the exercise. And finally, that neither red nor purple are the one single truth, but that both of these exercises, and both in their simulation and emulation formats, have a place in an offensive security program. And I see Eric popping up as well. So I think my time is up. And this is a final meme slide while we go into the questions.
We have one question, I think, in the Q&A, which is about, is it best to conduct a purple team assessment and then validate your findings with the red team assessment? Jonas?
I think I see the question came in at 8:52. So I think maybe my slides explain an answer afterwards. But at least I think, as you saw in the continuous purple team slide, that the idea is that purple teaming is the course and red teaming the exam. They also both have different purposes. So with the purple team, you want to improve your detections, and with the red team, you want to validate or assess whether or not you can detect and remediate an attack. So I think there is no one definite answer, like yes, you need to do purple team first and then validate with red team. You could also do a red team first to see, look, with the current defenses we have, with the current detections, where do we stand? Where are we? Would we be able to detect an attack? And then if the result there is disappointing, you could also invest in purple teaming and improve those defenses or detections.
Right. Thanks a lot. That was a pretty nice and complete answer, I think. So if there's anything else, you know where to find Jonas in his hallway channel, and of course, he'll be around for quite some more time.